Tim, take it away.
Yeah. So we're talking first about why we're here today. So as a digital agency owner who builds the internet for a living, and I think most everybody on this call is probably somehow, some way related to building digital products and services. I started learning around 2010, 2011 about the internet's massive environmental impact, and wanted to do something about it. And so really started thinking about how the products and services that we at Mightybytes design for our clients can in turn be made to reduce emissions and address climate change and issues of sustainability. And so over the past decade or so, we've been evolving and tweaking our process to make sure that the work that we do is better for people and for planet, as well as for our customers and their users. So next slide, please. There you go. Thanks, Nicole. So today we're going to just talk about kind of what came out of that and what came out of that for Wholegrain Digital, who's across the pond from us in the UK, and the practices that our two agencies have put together around applying sustainability principles to digital products and services. So next slide, please, Nicole. Tom, I'm going to throw this your way.
Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, over at Wholegrain, we've been massively inspired by what Mightybytes have been doing for about a decade, and being way ahead of the curve compared to the industry at large, and we're really kind of following in their footsteps, trying to get up to speed with this concept of sustainable web design. And really, what it means in essence is an approach to designing digital services that puts people and planet first. I mean, we're obviously, traditionally in digital projects, we're talking about business requirements and user requirements, but at the core of that, like any form of good design is like actually design that's responsible for society, design that is responsible from an environmental point of view. And I think must have been a couple of years ago now, we teamed up and Mightybytes, Wholegrain, and some other people in the industry that are sort of thinking along these lines, including some people who I think are on this call, and created the Sustainable Web Manifesto, which had six principles, and you can read these in more detail at sustainablewebmanifesto.org. But the principles are clean, efficient, open, honest, regenerative, and resilient. And we'll go through some of these things in the later slides, but essentially what we're talking about here is clean energy, so renewable energy sources powering the web, efficiency in terms of minimizing energy use wherever possible, open and honest to kind of largely like tie this in with the human aspect of design, but also can have environmental benefits as well in terms of sharing knowledge and resources and avoiding greenwash, which is sort of one of the hazards of sort of green design. And then regenerative is really about thinking about, what is the impact of these products, not just in terms of kind of technical, like energy or carbon impact, but also like what's the kind of bigger impact on society and the environment, and is the cost of what we're doing having a net positive impact on the world. And resilient is about making sure that things are fit for purpose, that people can use these things, can use the products that we make in the places they need them, when they need them. So that's a very kind of quick top-level overview of these Sustainable Web Manifesto principles.
Nicole, can you advance into the next slide? I think this is the screen grab of the actual manifesto itself. Anybody can sign it. So if you're on this call and have not signed the Sustainable Web Manifesto, please do it. As Tom said, it's at sustainablewebmanifesto.org. Next slide, please. So per what Tom was just saying, there are a bunch of strategies that we came up with for sustainablewebdesign.org. We, Mightybytes, put sustainablewebdesign.org out in 2013. About the same time we released EcoGrader, another tool that we worked on. Like I said, we've been kind of tweaking these approaches to what we do for a living, and coming up with some kind of broader categories. So when we redesigned sustainablewebdesign.org, the categories that we came up with, which are also relevant in Tom's new book, were design, client, and project ethos. So like, what is the actual thing that your project is promoting and stands for? Content and marketing. So the idea being getting people efficiently to to content that they need, web development, hosting, and then business operations. Next slide, please.
We are at the open discussion of some of these topics now. So to open us up, I thought that it might be interesting to just meditate on this opening quote that we have. Good design is as little as possible. Tim, can you tell me like what that means to you necessarily?
Sure. Yeah. So when I was working on designing for sustainability, one of the biggest kind of things that I wanted to get across was that good UX practices and more sustainable UX practices are really about helping users accomplish the tasks that they need as quickly as possible. So while Dieter Rams' quote is relevant to architecture, since he was an architect, for those of us who build digital products and services, it's really relevant in terms of making sure if you're putting together, you're not putting obstacles in the way of users and getting them to fill out forms or whatever it is that they need to do, they're doing that as quickly, as efficiently as possible, and that there are no barriers to being able to do that. Tom, do you have anything you want to add to that kind of general philosophy around what sustainable UX design would be?
Yeah, and I think it's very much kind of a less is more approach in a sort of holistic, sort of minimalist principle across the board in what we do in digital. So obviously, like user experience, like Tim said, keeping those experiences really, really streamlined, but also just in terms of things like the detail of our aesthetic designs and what are we including in them, because all of that information adds up, both in terms of mental clutter for users, but also in terms of like information that has to be stored and transmitted. So I think just sort of keeping sort of minimalism and less is more as a sort of overarching principle is really beneficial for people and planet.
Yeah. Next slide, please, Nicole. So for each of these, we decided, we only had an hour for a webinar, and as you can probably imagine, each of these 6 principles or 6 strategy categories has a lot underneath them. And in fact, the website that we've been working on is very much a 1.0 release. We plan to add a lot more content to it to make it more useful. So these examples that we're going to talk through are really high level, and purposefully so, because we could spend several hours talking about each one of these. However, the idea is to get across the basic concepts, and in each of the sections on sustainablewebdesign.org, we list several resources for each. So in terms of optimizing design assets, that's really about like compressing images, compressing videos, making sure everything is optimized for performance across platforms and devices as possible. Prioritizing colors that use less energy. So, different lighter colors like white backgrounds and stuff on OLED screens use more energy. Reducing steps in UX tasks, as I mentioned earlier. Reducing the number of custom fonts that you use. Respecting user privacy. I think that's, there's an efficiency thing there. If you're, not respecting user privacy, you're pulling a lot of data that maybe you don't need and that your users don't want you to take. And so making sure that that's a really key and important element to the work that you're doing. And then finally, putting this in here, accounting for human and non-human stakeholders. So I think, in our UX practices, we're kind of, it's drilled in us to be focused on users, and that's really incredibly important. However, there are, as the whole purpose of this conversation, non-human stakeholders like the planet that are involved in our projects, whether we know it or like it or not. And so making sure that you're taking that into consideration. Sometimes some of the things that we've found helpful in early parts of projects and just in conversations about projects is, kind of just mapping out who the stakeholders are and what the ecosystem looks like and such. Tom, do you have anything to add to this in terms of the high-level design strategy examples?
I think that's a really good overview, and I think I think again, it's just about thinking through every detail. One of the things we found is that attention to detail is really the key in kind of the design. That most of this stuff isn't high tech inherently. It doesn't necessarily require sort of new skills or specialist tools. A lot of it is just spending the time to really think about every detail and ask yourself, is this necessary? Is there a better way? Could we streamline this?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Next slide, please.
absolutely. All right. And now we're talking about client and project strategies. So for me personally, when I think about sustainability, a really important part of that conversation is the way that sustainability extends beyond simply the environmental impact, but also upon like how how it impacts the individuals who are involved in the process. So as this quote says, during the design and development process, there are often choices that are made about who is allowed to participate, how that happens, and these are all acts that have a political charge to them. So I guess the question here is, how do you take that into account, and how do you make sure that you aren't ignoring the act of you know involving stakeholders or taking the cowardly way out, as Mike puts it.
Right. Yeah, I think we had in our prep call for this yesterday, we had an interesting discussion about like exactly, figuring out what it is the projects that you choose to work on are going to actually promote. And a lot of our conversation revolved around saying no to bad money and what the term bad money means, since it could mean different things for different people. But overall, the general gist is, and I think both Mightybytes and Wholegrain Digital share this, that the ethos that we want our projects to kind of put out there in the world is using business for as a force for good, making sure that people are included, and strategies for justice and equity and diversity and inclusion are included in the work that we do and stuff. And so I think we're not alone either. I think many of the people obviously on this call are share that same kind of idea. So next slide, Nicole. These are some of the strategies that we put together for client and project ethos for sustainablewebdesign.org. The idea of incorporating, as I said earlier, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and making sure that we're including diverse stakeholders in our projects. That's diverse stakeholders makes for better projects. That's just a fact. And then, promoting good health and wellness. So for us, that means work-life balance, making sure that the actual execution of the project helps keep stress levels at a minimum. These, like a lot of us who are in digital agencies, work on big, long projects that take many, many months and that can be very stressful over time and stuff. So figuring out how to build, regular check-ins to make sure that we're paying attention to our health and wellness as we go through the projects, as well as making sure that the project itself is also promoting those things. So, I mean, at Mightybytes, we don't, we wouldn't do a project for a tobacco company, for instance, and that's the kind of clients we look for are aligned with what the values that we hold as a company. Promoting equitable wealth distribution. I think that's really about like paying a living wage and just making sure that the project that you're working on is also putting that. I think we're in that place right now with the gig economy where income inequality is becoming a bigger and bigger issue in our industry, especially. And so figuring out, how do you actually make decisions around the projects that you're working on so that equitable wealth distribution is part of the mix as well. And then finally, just, having a project that supports more sustainable behavior. So, that works down to the page level where, maybe you're offering more sustainable shipping options, but then when it goes all the way up to the client and project level, where, you're just making sure that like the projects that you're working on are supporting, more sustainable behaviors. I want to say that all of this said, it's not always possible. And we acknowledge that, and I acknowledge that. I don't know if you have anything you want to add to this, Tom. I know we went back and forth on this a little bit, but
yeah, I mean, I think firstly it's important to say that this is one of the most highly subjective areas of like sustainable design, and I think there is no like kind of black and white perfect way of doing things, but I think what's really important is that like project teams form their own vision of what they think is like the right way to run a project, and that they kind of hold that in their minds right from that foundation of a project, and the onboarding of a client even,
Right.
through to its conclusion. But also in terms of sustainable behaviors, there's the kind of day-to-day workflow of like, do we need to kind of have physical meetings if that's going to be like, if we're not local and we have to travel a long way, possibly even fly for a meeting for a web project, is that required, or could we run our projects in different ways that are inherently more sustainable?
Right. And no time has that been more evident than the past year.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Next slide, please.
All right. So content marketing and marketing strategies. So this is a really important one to me personally. Don't put something out there unless it matters to you and your audience. If you publish something useless, you're not only wasting time for yourself and your visitors, but you're also adding to the weight of your website and the web itself. So this quote is all about intentionality in terms of the content that's produced and posted, and making sure that things that you put out into the world have some sort of purpose. Um, and I was wondering a bit about like, how do you assess what is useful to an audience, or how do you make sure that, what is the process of deciding like what is important enough or what is useful enough to publish, I guess, because there's a lot of incentive, I feel, to publish things that aren't kind of important or just kind of generate clicks, and there is a difference between those two things, right?
Sure. Tom, this one's yours.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, it sort of comes back to this principle of minimalism, and I think Jerry McGovern talks in his book Worldwide Waste a lot about like the huge amount of just waste that there is on the internet, of content that's being stored and that people are loading, that's really not adding great value to people. Maybe it's even okay content, but it's just like duplicate. There's like thousands of other articles that basically say the same thing, and it's just there to try and kind of attract some clicks, as Nicole said. And so I think in content planning, it's really important to start with looking at who are the actual stakeholders of a particular web service and what is genuinely useful to them, and actually do that research into how can we give them the stuff that's useful to them in the most concise way possible. Because if it's not really streamlined and concise, then you're making it more difficult for them. You're wasting their time. So focusing really in on like real human needs is a good lens to actually streamline content and strip out things that are actually getting in people's way. And testing, if you're not sure, like, that's what analytics is. That's the one good use of analytics, right? Is like to find out is this content useful for people, or is it a dead end? Are people like, coming into a piece of content and then bouncing straight out because it's not really what they're looking for? Identifying those pain points.
Nicole, do you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah.
So I love that quote from Andy. Orbit Media Studios is right up the street from Mightybytes. They are also a B Corp. And Andy and I have had conversations about this whole idea of creating content that's useful for your target audience for years now. And I think, we all get it in theory, and, the reality is in practice, especially, if you're working perhaps with clients who just, want to throw everything out there and they want all the things to be on the website. We have had many clients like that in the past. And how do you have those conversations to help them understand, like, look, we're working to create content that is truly useful for your target users. And I think it's not an easy, it's an easy sentence to write. It's not an easy thing to do in practice, I think.
Yeah.
I think, part and parcel with that is also making content accessible and easy to find. Making sure that users with disabilities can access the content, making sure that, anybody who you're kind of following SEO best practices, and making sure that, in addition to focusing first on humans and the humans that are going to read it, that you're also optimizing the content in a way that is efficient, and also helps, people with screen readers and assistive technologies, absorb it and understand it. And then also, making it easily by following web standards and SEO practices for, search engines to find it and serve it up in search engine pages. And I think the last point on this thing is, you really brought up the point of considering content's end of life. I think I know we're not very good at we regularly audit our content, but we don't necessarily plan for when is this post or when is this section of content going to be no longer useful. I think, we can put expiration dates on it and stuff like that, but I think that, it's easy to focus on what's here and now and looking forward, as opposed to kind of going back and being like, oh, that blog post I wrote last year about topic X sucked and nobody read it, and so we should figure out what to do about that, do with it.
Yeah, I think, content strategies are nearly always content creation strategies. There's very rarely discussion around how long is this going to stay online? Should we update it in 6 months' time, a year's time? Whatever it is, it's just you create it. You set it live, and you forget about it. But there are real benefits to streamlining that content, not just in terms of an easier user experience because there's less clutter, but also there can be kind of better commercial results. We've got a client who is really on top of their content strategy in a kind of long-term sense, and they keep coming back to it, and they find that the posts that they regularly update, every few months, because of the topics they're talking about are quite, that they evolve over time. So rather than constantly writing new articles that are kind of an evolution of the same thing, they keep going back and actually just updating the original articles on these kind of evergreen topics. And they find that those are consistently the ones that bring in the most traffic and the most revenue for them as a client. Yeah. So I think there's real value in valuing old content as much as creating new content.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There's for sure. We've taken a approach to our own blog with that, similar to that, over the past few years, of just making sure that things that have been out there for several years, are they still useful? Are they still the things that we want to, and do they need to be updated? So then let's put the effort into making sure that the information is as useful as possible.
Yeah.
So, next slide, please.
All right. We're at developmental strategies now. As web applications continue to grow in their scope and ambition and functionality, so too does the amount of data that needs to be downloaded by each application, and that continues to increase at a steady pace. So as this continues, so too does the what's the word?
Amount of data.
But also does our quest to fully optimize our delivery of great performance. And that is a complicated, technical, and hard to reach conclusion. I guess, how do you properly optimize all of this data that needs to be downloaded?
That's an ongoing moving target. The strategies for everything from minifying scripts to optimizing images, as I mentioned earlier, it's a constant thing, and it's a lot. I mean, there's a lot there. I think one of the things that could be useful, and that I think we personally as a company need to do a little bit better at, is creating page weight budgets. I love the idea of those, but we haven't been as good as I think we can be as a company in using those, and then also helping clients kind of understand their benefits. I don't know.
Tim, do you want to just quickly, for anybody who's not familiar with the concept, just introduce what a page weight budget is?
Yeah, sure. So page weight budget is basically setting, there's performance calculator that you can use. That's what we've been using. And you can go in and I don't have the link to it handy, but I'm sure someone on here can actually, I think if you just Google performance calculator.
I think it might be performancebudget.io.
Yes,
from memory.
You are correct. Yeah, that's it. So, just setting kind of a target ceiling for the data that you're using on each page. And then understanding, and that comes with understanding who your users are and making sure that you're optimizing for the widest possible, low bandwidth users widest number of devices and platforms, and just making sure that you know, the data rate that you're doing is as optimized as possible and as minified as possible. And so setting a per page data ceiling, and then using the performancebudget.io to see how good you're actually applying to that. I don't know, Tom, if you've had other kind of use cases for doing that.
Yeah, I mean, the page rate budget absolutely is a kind of a key strategy for us. I think, and I should just say the performance budget tool, Antonio just posted the link in the chat for anybody who's interested in looking at that tool.
Thank you, Antonio.
But I think just in general, like what this quote kind of sums up is this classic issue in computing of feature creep. You know, and it's always been the issue since like the first computer I ever had, which is that, you know, a few years down the line, this super fast machine that you had suddenly seems to be going at a snail's pace, and you can't buy any new software that will actually work on it. And we've kind of, you know, got the same issue on the web, where the faster the internet gets, the more powerful, not just data center processing, but, you know, the phones and computers that we're using as end users are using, the more powerful everything gets and the faster everything gets, the more we can use up that potential. So we add in more bloated code, we add in more features, we use larger files, and so although, you know, yeah, the internet's got faster in terms of like user experience, perceived speed, but actually behind the scenes, it's nowhere near as fast as it could be, because we're always kind of eating into that advantage that the new technology is giving us. And so if you look back at a website from like, you know, the early 2000s, most of them would be more efficient and in some cases more accessible than like a really well optimized website now, just because we're layering in so much more in terms of design and technology, and partly we get away with it because it's easy. The internet's fast, and we know it's going to be even faster tomorrow. So just you know, throw things in. But actually, I think a really considered approach, again, it's about attention to detail of thinking how can we strip things back, is really necessary. We need to really optimize performance at every level.
Absolutely. You want to go to the next slide, Nicole? I'm going to put a link in the chat to a blog post Mightybytes wrote a while back. When GDPR came out, the data privacy legislation in the EU, a developer did a test of removing all the like user tracking and ad scripts and stuff from USA Today, a popular newspaper here in the US, and found out that 90% of the actual data was in those scripts, and that they basically pulled the page, I don't exactly, it's 5.2 megabyte page down to 500K. And that's just by removing ad tracking and tracking user behavior and stuff like that. And so, you know, that in that list, we have, you know, optimized performance of all assets, what we just talked about, but making sure that, you know, you're not tracking things unnecessarily, and prioritizing privacy and security goes a long way in helping, you know, make these solutions, you know, more sustainable, lean and mean. Stuff that goes for following, you know, kind of web standards, and making sure we at Mightybytes and Wholegrain, I'm sure it shares this, is using open source tools and modular frameworks for the work that we do. And I know our devs try to write reusable code whenever possible. Anything else you want to add on this topic, Tom?
I think it's, I mean, we could spend a long time here.
Yeah, exactly. and then there's like Google and all kinds of folks have you know written about this for years and years and years. There's so much content around this.
Optimize.
Yeah, totally. So with that in mind, let's go to the next screen.
All right, hosting strategies. So hosting is something that most people, like particularly users, but also I guess the producers of digital products don't often think about, but it's a huge deal to really think about, like, you know, how do we host our websites? Who's hosting them? How are these centers being powered? And one of the things that I guess is really difficult about it is like you don't know necessarily. I don't think that that's one of the things that a lot of places uses to market their services or don't like offer while you're doing research. So how do you kind of track down this information, or how should we think about hosting our digital products more responsibly?
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, so I mean, definitely, this is a huge issue in terms of, I like the way Gary Cook's put this, that the internet is the single biggest thing that we're ever going to build, and
Right.
and it's all powered by electricity. So if we can as an industry prioritize renewable energy, that will help shift the whole energy grid. But if we don't, then we're actually kind of jeopardizing the whole kind of societal shift towards renewables. And so an easy way that we can do that, without actually being like a data center provider, which is most of us are not, is to use something like the Green Web Foundation database, which lists providers that have made a commitment to using renewable energy, and you can also kind of check websites and IP addresses using their API tool. But also, in our experience, one of the best ways is to just kind of find the providers that you think meet your technical requirements, and then ask them the question. Ask them to see their sustainability policies and their commitments to renewable energy in writing, and you'll generally get like one of a few responses. You'll either get no response, you'll either
And
get, and then that basically they've not really thought about this and they don't want to talk about it. Or you'll get a really great response, which they may not publicize on their website, in which case I always go back and say, hey, this stuff should be like front and center on your website. Or you'll get something kind of in the between where they'll say, yeah, actually, like this is stuff we care about and it's stuff we're working towards, but we're not all the way there yet. And that's great to hear, and it's good to have that transparency.
Yeah, absolutely. We found we went through probably every green web host around when we were starting around this in the 2011, 2013. We got test accounts with all of them and really had challenges with a lot of them, and found that and again, this was 7, 8, 9 years ago. But we were completely impressed by commitment to renewable energy with some of them, but they didn't have the customer service or the uptime or the security and reliability that we needed. And so there's a whole bunch of things to consider here in the mix. And I love that they committed to renewable energy, but if I can't get a hold of anybody when I need them, then per the Sustainable Web Manifesto, that's not a resilient service. It's not really. And so, we went all over the place to find, a good web hosting partner. Yeah, it was a long journey for sure.
Yeah.
Nicole, will you, can you go one slide forward? So, I want to preface this by the fact that I'm certainly not a hosting expert, know there's not enough about, Chris Adams, who is on here, probably knows way more than both Tom and I combined. He's on this topic for sure. But I'm happy to share with what the knowledge that we do have. Point one is for us it has always been the top one, which is why I put it in the list here. And then we're a LAMP stack firm, and so Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP are the tools of choice that we use when working on things. Tom, do you want to add anything to this? I mean, this is like you said, like performance optimization in development. This is one of those rabbit holes that you could go down to and get really tweaky for a really long time. So
yeah, you can. I mean, one thing I'd definitely say is on the hosting side, in addition to like the renewable energy kind of commitment, like the actual efficiency of the technology itself is massively important, and especially in overcoming some inefficiencies in the kind of the code that we're using. So for example, WordPress is an amazing tool, but it's not inherently efficient in the way that it works behind the scenes. But if you've got a really well optimized hosting service that's doing, pretty heavy caching so that there's minimal server load for every visitor, that's taking a lot of load off the servers and saving a lot of energy in the process. So a well-designed hosting service can actually really kind of minimize the energy demand.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the next slide.
All right.
Otherwise, like I said, we only have an hour here and we want to get to Q&A for sure.
Yeah, we have some good questions in the chat, so I would love to get to Q&A. But for business operations, so there's this observable fact that we have, that companies that focus on sustainability or have missions that are socially and environmentally minded have have better outcomes. They're more effective. They have better financial performance. They're more resilient. And I guess the question there is why? Why does doing good lead to doing well? If either of you have an answer to that question, yeah.
I think both Tom and I could, again, talk for an hour or two about this. I mean, Mightybytes has been a B Corp since 2011, and integrating purpose and profit and having a social and environmental mission at the core of the business and our business model has been incredibly important for us. It's really is how we kind of define who we are as a business and what we stand for and stuff. It's where we put the line in the sand in terms of things that we do and don't do. I know that there are a bunch of B Corp fans in this workshop or webinar, so I really appreciate that. I wouldn't run my business any other way. I just know that the B Impact Assessment, which is the tool that we use to kind of manage our impact, is this really great design tool for helping you design a better business and create a roadmap for improving your impact over time. And it also just kind of gives you guardrails to say, this is the stuff that we stand for as a business, and these are the things that we don't. And so, we're about to undergo our 5th B Corp certification, and it's an arduous process. It's a lot, it takes a lot of time, but I actually look forward to it too, because it's a chance for me to take a step back and look at all the moving parts of my business and say, all right, where are the areas that I can improve? What can we do better at? What is maybe not necessarily working? That kind of thing. So I personally think that business operations strategies for digital agencies especially are core to this whole idea of sustainable web design. Tom, would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with everything you just said. And in response to what Nicole said about, why do businesses that prioritize sustainability and sort of social purpose tend to perform better financially? And I think a big part of it is that word purpose, that when there's a clear purpose within an organization, that intrinsically motivates people in a way that kind of just going to work because that's my job doesn't do. And when you have not just leaders, but like entire teams and companies of people who are aligned with trying to create some real positive impact in the world, it's a reason to get out of bed in the morning and try to do not just an okay job, but try to do like the best you can possibly do and deliver like really, really great products and services. And I think that kind of an aspect of intrinsic motivation is a key factor in why they perform well. And then they also attract really talented people because those talented people want to do something meaningful with their skills and their time.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Next slide, Nicole, please.
Okay.
Thanks. So I mentioned this earlier, and track and verify impact using the B Impact Assessment or similar. There's other tools. The B Impact Assessment is not the only one out there, but personally as B Corps, that's what we use. Committed to improving economic benefits for stakeholders. I mean, that's really just making sure that the financial solvency that your company has is also helping any of your company's stakeholders. Incorporating justice, equity, diversity, inclusion policies into your operations and your governance and everything about your business. And then, of course, divesting from fossil fuels whenever and wherever possible. On the past year, we've been on a net zero journey. And so we actually just got to a place where we can offer carbon negative website hosting and such with our clients. And so that's been a driver for us for this, is just, how do we make sure that our organization eventually completely divests from fossil fuels in all of its operations and business. Anything you want to add to that, Tom?
I think just to say that, like, the reason that we've included this here is because as people who work in digital projects, it's not just the projects themselves. Like, we all work within organizations, and those organizations have an impact in their own way on society, on the planet, and we all play a part in trying to make that as positive as possible.
Yeah, I agree. So I know there was, next slide, please. I know that there were some questions about, like, recommendations for, kind of some of these strategies. For each one of these things in these bullets that we mentioned today, sustainablewebdesign.org is where Wholegrain and Mightybytes have been collaborating for the past few months on a revamp of sustainablewebdesign.org, and all of these strategies are included in there. And then under each strategy, there is at least one, if not several, links to out to posts about that topic. And it's a 1.0 release. We just launched it on Monday. There's still a lot of things, like we want to add a dark mode. We have some accessibility controls we want to add to it. I mean, there's definitely some more things that we're going to be working on at it. But for now, in the preparation for this webinar, we wanted to get a base level or baseline of strategies out there that anybody on this website can, or on this webinar can use and reference and stuff. And if you have strategies that absolutely think need to be included, hit that contact button on there and feel free to send them to us, and we'll be continuing to add to this and making it a better resource.
Absolutely. This is going to evolve over time, so we really want people to feed into this and make it a resource that everybody can benefit from.
Yeah, and I think to that, next slide, one of the main reasons is that someone we know has a book coming out on this topic in a matter of a couple of weeks. And so we wanted to make sure that the site represented the book. And so, Tom, tell us about your new book.
Yeah, sure. So I don't know if people can see me on camera or whether they can only see the slides, but
woo!
I got the first copy of my new book, Sustainable Web Design, in the post today.
That's awesome.
Which is really exciting, because I hadn't seen the actual book since it was in its previous incarnation as a Word document. So that's super exciting. And one of the reasons I wrote the book was because I really want to put sustainability on the agenda of the web industry as, like, a serious topic that should be, like, included at the core of, like, all projects. And like we consider accessibility like an important topic in our industry, we consider security and privacy important topics in our industry, we should be looking at sustainability in the same way. And that was really my motivation for writing the book, is to be just one more small drop in the ocean to, like, helping nudge things along in that direction. If you blink to the next slide, Nicole, I'll just give you a very quick overview. I'm not going to, like, bore you by reading the whole book for the next 12 hours. But what's inside the book? The book very much focuses on the environmental side of sustainable web design. So here in this webinar, we've been talking about people and planet, and the book does talk about kind of the human side as well, but the core focus is very much how can we minimize our environmental impact. So it goes through, like, the what and the why, like, why should we care about this as a topic? What is it? And how is it relevant to our day-to-day work as people who work in digital? There's then a chapter about, like, quantifying our own impact and benchmarking and trying to get a sense of, like, scale and being able to, like, judge success of, are we actually managing to make tangible improvements? There's then a chapter on design, which includes real examples of, like, techniques that you could actually do in your design process to make things more efficient while also improving user experience and accessibility, which I think is really key. Similarly for development, so real examples. It's not a coding book. This book is, like, written in a way that should hopefully be understandable to anybody who works on digital projects, whether you're a project manager or a marketing manager or a designer, developer. So it's not, you're not going to find code in the development chapter, but you will find like principles and examples that you can follow and you can try to embed into your own projects. Similarly, hosting, we do a bit of a deep dive into like the kind of the nuances of what does like green hosting really mean, and open up that can of worms and get into it a little bit, but in a kind of accessible way, and try to provide some practical advice on the things to look for when choosing a hosting service. And then a question that's like commonly comes up that people commonly ask me is like, well, how do you actually sell sustainability in like the digital world? Get buy-in from your clients, get buy-in from your managers, get buy-in from your colleagues. So there's a chapter really talking about that, and draws on some of the experience that we've had at Wholegrain, also that Tim has had in his agency at Mightybytes over the years, to shed some light on how to go about that. And then finally, just a chapter really reflecting on kind of the resilience of the web itself in a changing climate, and how we can do all these things to try and make digital have less of a negative impact, but hopefully even a positive impact on the environment. But we should also reflect on how the climate is changing, and that changes the web itself in terms of both the human needs of like the situations people might find themselves in response to like natural disasters, but also the physical infrastructure of the internet and how that can be affected by rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and so on. And how we need to be thinking ahead and making our services as resilient as possible to kind of get ahead of that.
Awesome. Well, kudos to you, Tom. That's awesome. We're really, really happy for you. That's
Thank you.
Great.
So it will be, you can pre-order now. And
I put the link in the chat to pre-order the book.
It'll be out in 2 weeks, so they'll start posting them out soon.
So last thing we're going to cover, and I'm going to go through this quickly. I will put links to all the things that we're going to talk about in the chat, but I want to make sure we have time for Q&A, and we're already 10 minutes up on the hour. So I'm quickly whizzing through these slides. We're going to talk about just kind of different resources. So Jerry McGovern's book, Worldwide Waste, my book on designing for sustainability, cross-cultural design from A Book Apart, the same publisher is publishing Sustainable Web Design. Next slide. Wholegrain has put together a website, carbon.com, for actually tracking emissions of web pages. In 2013, Mightybytes launched EcoGrader, which is kind of, I would say, the precursor to that. And it's on the list for us to overhaul it and give it a revamp this year. We were trying to get sustainable web design out the door, and that's kind of next in our sight. So next slide. Tom, you want to talk for a second about Curiously Green?
Yeah, just to say that we've got a monthly newsletter where we talk about things that are going on in this world of greening the web, and you can subscribe to that in the footer of the Wholegrain Digital website or in the footer of the website Carbon website. And I invite you to suggest what you want to see in there and send over ideas and stuff.
Great. Next slide, please. So climateaction.tech, climatedesigners.org are two great resources. And I'm just going to kind of leave that as is. And again, I'll put the URLs for these in the chat for people who want to click directly. Next slide. And then yesterday I heard from James at Sustainable UX that they are going to have an upcoming event in Q3 of 2021. So sustainableux.com has been doing covering this topic since 2015 or 16, I think. And it's been typically a free annual online conference via YouTube Live and such. So there's a whole bunch of resources there to push further beyond this. But I want to make sure that we can go to the next slide. We can get into Q&A because we are running short on time. I know that was a fast whiz through, but.
All right. Okay. So we have a few questions in the chat asking for some more resources or recommendations for implementing and maintaining some of these strategies. If you have any more specific questions, you can put them in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to assume that those were answered by the last few slides. Also, this deck will be available afterwards. I know we went through that really fast. So if you missed any of the URLs, you'll have access to all of the resources here afterwards. for our first question, though, we had some technical questions about how to determine which colors are the most resource intensive, and I just wanted to get those out of the way because those were the first few questions that came in. Do we have any specific strategies for that?
Yeah, sure. So Google did a study. It was based on their Pixel phones with OLED screens, and essentially, the simple answer is that the brighter the color, the more energy it uses, because OLED screens are basically tiny light bulbs. So the whiter it is, the more energy it's using. Black is basically switched off. But the only kind of nuance there that they found was that blue, for some reason, out of all the colors that are not white, blue was the most energy intensive. It was about 25% more energy intensive than the red and green pixels.
All right. Thank you for that answer. We have a question about how many people optimize their sites for Ecosia instead of or as well as Google.
Yeah, I saw that question earlier. Thank you for it, Andrew. I am under the impression, and Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Ecosia uses, is it Bing's search results?
It's Bing, yeah.
Yeah. So, honestly, for us, when we're thinking about optimizing a site, it's for performance, and the search engine is latter. Obviously, we want to optimize for search engines in terms of crawlability, but that, web standards take care of a lot of that, accessibility takes care of a lot of that, and just optimizing your content in a way that is useful. So I can't say personally that we, specifically look at Ecosia. I use it as my default search engine in my computer, but I can't say that we absolutely optimize sites for that. Our goal at Mightybytes, at least, is to just follow search engine optimization best practices. Tom, is there anything different that you're doing?
No, absolutely the same, yeah.
All right. Veronica asks, how can you balance your business needs for advertising and tracking scripts with keeping your site live?
Yeah. You know what, Tom, you answer that one.
Sure. Well, I think it comes back to this principle of really interrogating what you're trying to achieve.
Right.
So in terms of tracking, look at what is the data that you actually need and why do you need it? And once you know that, then look at what's the most efficient way, what are the most efficient tracking scripts that could achieve that. And even, a lot of tracking scripts have ways that they have kind of minimal versions of them that you can use. But equally, in terms of the advertising scripts, there was an interesting case study I saw last week of I think it was the Dutch state broadcaster. I can't remember what they're called, but how they had removed personalized ads from their website and found that actually they ended up generating more revenue from ads by building their own ad server, which had non-personalized ads so that they could actually not have to worry about the GDPR implications. And I thought that was great because there's this kind of assumption that A, more data is always better, and B, more personalization is always better. And I think it's interesting that there's case studies coming out where people have challenged that and found that they can actually get better results with less tracking and less personalization.
I would just add to that maybe on a layer of get permission too. Whenever it's possible, is just adding the idea of opt-in, to all those things.
Yeah, connected with this topic, I think, is there something, for example, storytelling that can make this connection for potential clients in terms of, I think this is in terms of how selling sustainability in a sense. How do you make clients understand that this is an important thing that matters?
Tom, since you have a chapter of that on that in your book, I'm going to also defer to you on that one. I have thoughts, but
I think the key thing, no matter who you're talking to, is to understand what they care about, understand who they are, and talk to them in their own language about the things that they care about. And the interesting thing about the kind of many sustainability strategies in digital projects is that they tend to have positive benefits in other areas, whether that's improved conversion rates or improved SEO or improved user experience or improved accessibility or a whole combination of these things. And I think that finding out what people really care about and then telling the story within that frame is tends to be the thing that gets them interested, rather than trying to make somebody who's not that interested in sustainability become interested in sustainability.
Right. Yeah, no, when we first started doing, oh, sorry, I didn't mean
No,
to
that's
interrupt
it.
you.
Yeah.
You blanked out there for a bit. Yeah, when we started first trying to sell this, we got a lot of kind of glazed over looks in the early days, and realized that we kind of needed to adjust our approach accordingly. And I think exactly what you just said is a really, really smart way to look at it, for sure. We're coming up on time, and I know there's a whole bunch of other questions on reusable design and headless CMS and WordPress and all that kind of stuff. First of all, thank you everybody for all of your questions. I'm sorry we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but I do want to actually close out with one thing that kind of I think touches on a lot of these questions. We chose WordPress for sustainablewebdesign.org. And we had a long conversation about this up front, because we thought we really wanted to do like a headless, like a Jamstack type thing, and create a static site. What we realized with the time that we had, was that we didn't, a big learning curve. Well, we're also trying to do our client work every day was going to be a real struggle for us. In the amount of time we wanted to get sustainablewebdesign.org out by the time that the book came out. We knew that there was going to be a 1.0 release, and that there's going to be, we're going to be adding to that and improving it over time. And so, I think these questions around like, which, whether you use a Start CMS, whether WordPress is that CMS, whether or not you use one of these headless approaches, really depends on a number of different factors. And for us, when Wholegrain and Mightybytes were sitting down and trying to figure out, what's the best way for us to approach this, we ultimately landed in an area where we pushed our comfort zone a little bit, but we didn't go too far afield from it. And I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Tom, but
Yeah.
I think it's an important point to bring up in regards to
I think it
questions.
is, and I think there's a lot of benefits to Jamstack as a technology for efficiency, of like technical efficiency and energy efficiency. But I think there's also, you can do a huge amount to optimize platforms like WordPress, like I said earlier, to get them very, very close to the same level of efficiency. And
right.
What you're getting at the same time is ease of, like, speed of development, if that's what your comfort zone is, and you're getting ease of maintaining content, which is equally important, like we were talking about earlier. So you got to weigh up those benefits based on like your own skills, your own knowledge, and what's going to work for you, but try to implement it in an efficient way.
Cool, thanks. Next slide, Nicole. I just wanted to close out with one quick thing. We are Mightybytes committed to doing these webinars monthly. And so our next one's going to be on corporate digital responsibility and kind of exploring frameworks for helping organizations rethink about how digital products and services integrate with their business practices in a responsible way. So I put a link in the chat to RSVP for our next one, which is going to be at the end of February. Thank you all, everybody, for attending and for all the amazing, great questions. And yeah, we really appreciate it. Thank you, Tom and Nicole, for putting through all of this together and going through it back and forth and such. It's been really a good experience.
Yeah, and thank you so much to all of you who attended.
And we will set up send a thank you out with a link to the slide deck, a recording of the session, and any other resources that were shared here, so that you'll have all of those in your inbox. Thanks very much. All right, bye-bye.
All right.